Hi, welcome back. As we attempt to paint this portrait of my wife using an intuitive impasto technique all in a single session. I've been a bit sick for the last week or so, so this video is a bit delayed coming out, but hopefully going forward I will stick to my initial one video per week sort of commitment, but sometimes these things are out of our control. In this week's video, we will focus on many of the things we've already covered in previous videos, obviously color, design, mark making, but I think the main focus will be how to paint intuitively, how to paint freely, and really letting go of perfectionism. I think a lot of us start out really the beginning stage of our career as artists wanting to attain that perfection with every piece. And as time goes on, you'll find that you'll be making a whole lot of mistakes, but through that process of making mistakes, you'll learn a whole lot. If you're new here, my name is Zorn, and I've been doing this painting professionally for 25 years at this point. The intention of this channel, which is a relatively recent project of mine, is to build an audience around like-minded people who share this passion of mark making, really. I mean, I do focus on using oils for a lot of my tutorials, but in the future, the intention is really to expand that out through use of other mediums like gouache, which is one of my favorite mediums to use, and to a lesser extent, acrylics and pastels. As indicated, the model for this week is a photograph of my wife from probably 10 years ago at this point, where she's standing, I believe, in a vineyard and she's just looking over her shoulders. You may have noticed that in this initial stage, or the laying in stage, I'm staying quite lean, thin, and the mark making is, I don't want to say non-literal because I am painting someone I know, but you're letting shapes and lines sort of emerge on their own organically. I had initially used a what was really a frayed brush to sort of mark where I wanted to have her on the substrate. Now I'm using a brayer. No secret that it's one of my favorite tools. I've covered it somewhat in the previous videos. I'm using it to sort of lay down the darkest darks, really, with regards to the shape of the substrate. It's actually a phenomenal tool to layer paint, as it gives us this sort of transient, translucent qualities that it's difficult to sort of match with brush. I'll do a mini demo later on in this video just to sort of give you a visual representation as to what I mean by layering and creating depth of color and tone with the brayer and other tools. This is an Alla Prima portrait. That is, we completed it in one session, but as you can see here, brayer is being used to layer paint on top of already applied paint, which, as I said earlier, is very thin, dry. It's a dry brush scumbling type technique. So this intuitive approach that I'm referring to at this stage and later on when we start with the paint application really needs to be responsive from a creative perspective. It requires certain mindfulness and presence. Uh, this is a sped up video, so you may not see it, but every stroke that I make, every uh, brayer move, every color application later on that I apply, it requires you to stay present in the moment, focusing on the act of drawing and painting. Has a certain meditative process that is involved, and it's somewhat instinctual as well. This way of painting, where you're not tied down to sort of edges, everything is loose, everything is sort of whimsical, jumping around the canvas as opposed to filling in a shape. There's variety of line. You combine thick and thin. In this initial stage, of course, we're doing very thin. But later on, you'll see, this intuitive approach to drawing and painting has this balance of thin, bold, delicate lines that create a visual interest, really. And you explore contrasts, lights, heavy impasto marks, um, and you essentially get structured and loose forms at the end. You'll see as we get to the painting process. I think the key to creating intuitive art is that it really needs to be a personal expression. You, of course, need to know the limitations of your medium and your tools and all of that, but really it's focusing on the act itself, the process itself, and not so much on the finished look, the outcome. Now, that doesn't discount from, the importance of, in this case, for example, we're doing a portrait, so the drawing, you still need to be focused on, proportions and all of those things, but enjoying the process, enjoying sort of the mood, the thoughts, the processes you're subconsciously putting these lines and marks really all over the canvas. Now again, the layering that I mentioned earlier with the brayer, you can clearly see here I'm applying in the background some yellow ochre and white over the darker tones that I've already applied. As I said, it looks like it's a vineyard on this photo reference, but as you'll see when we get to the end of the painting, I've chosen to keep that sort of background entirely abstract and maybe even make it look like a cityscape. Really, it really plays a secondary role really to the subject. And just to sum up this initial underpainting part of this portrait, you want to make things as playful and as curious as possible. You want to treat mark making as somewhat of a playful exploration, free from judgment. You want to maybe experiment with pressure, with the speed, if you're using a brayer, for example, direction which you're taking it. But ultimately, you want to make it as fluid as possible. You want to have an expression of energy and emotion. As we go from this loose underpainting stage into a more thicker application stage of paints, let me give you a visual representation as to how that will look. And as you can see here, we've jumped to the end. And you can see all the little hues or notes of color on her face, defining her cheekbones, her nose, her lips, her eyes. Now let's go ahead and show you the process I took to get there. If this is the first video of mine that you're watching, I will give you an insight as to how I arrange my colors on my palette. For this demo, I'm using a vertical palette, so you see how I mix paint. But even for this or my standard palette, I arrange colors based on how cool or warm they are, or you can say how yellowish or bluish they are. So up along the top I have cooler colors, which are Viridian ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, and ivory black. And along the left side I have their corresponding warm colors, which are cadmium red light, permanent green. I've got cerulean blue, yellow ochre, and cadmium yellow middle. The tool that I'm using there for the paint application is a squeegee brush. I've got that in a couple of different sizes, ranging from 1/4 of an inch to an inch, inch and a half. And it really is a phenomenal tool for my direct Alla Prima painting application method. You can take paint, apply directly, wash it with a clean rag, and sort of jump around the canvas, which I have a tendency to do from shadow side to the light side without sort of creating mud on your painting. This direct way of painting, or alla prima in Italian for at once or at first attempt, where you essentially complete a painting in one session while it's still wet, has this fresh and spontaneous appearance. And I basically use it for most of my work. I don't generally do layering where I'm waiting for the paint to dry, uh, adhering to the old adage of fat over lean. I basically apply all that I need to apply in one session. Um, that doesn't mean that I don't paint more elaborate works. In fact, I do, but if I'm working on a section, I will finish it to completion um, in that one day. This fresh and spontaneous appearance has this characteristics of being very expressive, uh, which kind of contributes to the sense of immediacy and this energy, and it kind of lends well or ties well into this intuitive approach to art making, where there's minimal reworking. It gives this painting this fresh and lively feel. And as you can see, I'm applying paint now. I'm jumping all over the canvas with the light tones, working them wet on wet. They are sort of sitting on top. In some sections, they're kind of blending in into the underpainting already applied. It does require certain quickness for this to actually get applied. I mean, as I said, it's a 1 day's painting session, so you do need to sort of be mindful of what paint color cues are being applied and then apply it before everything essentially dries. I mean, if you do come back to this the following day, you'll find that it's not entirely dry, but it's tacky to the extent that you can't sort of work into it as you would in one single day. The other thing that Alla Prima is sort of characterized by is this vivid color and bold contrasts. When you directly mix color, it leads to this vibrant, dynamic sort of contrast between color values from shadows to lights. You will notice that I do use brushes as well, like I am right now in applying her lips. But I'm holding that brush, which is very frayed as well, in a loose fashion, and I'm kind of dragging that paint on the surface. I'm not filling anything in. You'll see at the end, when I zoom in further, that what I'm creating there are very sort of loose and undefined edges to define that form. From a distance, it reads as a solid, but from up close, it becomes this sort of maze of different color values that define that section of her face. Every stroke that I make with the brush and the brayer and of course the squeegee tool, I am constantly mindful of the lights and the darks and keeping them separate, and of course the color temperature that's being applied. So for our model here, what we have is somewhat of a high noon warm light, I guess, shining, that's creating cooler shadows on the left side of her face here. But there is sort of like a reflected light as well that's coming in from the bottom. I'm not sure what it's reflecting off of, so it's a bit of a tricky lighting situation from that perspective. But as I said in my previous videos, it's imperative when painting using this Alla Prima, where there's really very minimal reworking and it's essentially characterized with confident and intentional mark making. It's imperative to sort of be mindful of lights and darks and keep them separate at all times. As you'll find that if you're not, every little cue of color that's out of place will stick out in the final piece. Thus far, I haven't talked about the color mixing. I plan on doing a video especially sort of devoted to that subject, as it's quite important and elaborate and often confusing to a lot of students. But just to give you an overview here, as it's not the main focus of this video, but uh, as I talked earlier about the temperature of the light coming in, once you're aware of that and once you sort of establish that, you can layer color as you would see it in front of you. So not being tied down to just local color, in this case, her skin being a certain shade of yellow, ochre, cadmium, red light, and white. You can layer other warm colors on the palette next to it to give it this vibrancy, this energy, as opposed to just having one color. And it's the same for the shadow side. If you stay within the value range of the cool colors, there's no rule where that says you can't put a red there if it's a cool red of the right value beside the cool blues or the teals or the greens. So that's just a general overview as to how I apply color. Uh, this sort of falls on a shape, in this case a face, but the exact same rule can be applied for a landscape or a cityscape or any other portrait, light skin or dark skin for that matter. This really showcases how I use that special tool of mine, the squeegee brush. I apply paint in this sort of whimsical jump around the canvas type of a fashion. The palette on the right, which seems all out of place, has meaning to me. I think there's some sort of order in that, but as you can see, I'm sort of uh, taking paint, applying paint, and jumping all over the light tones here, adding different color notes that are warm, again, for that face to give it that energy that we talked about. I chose to put this complimentary mini demo in here just to showcase close up in detail how I layer color and the effects of different colors when they're layered on top of one another. What you see there is just a base coat of just whatever mud color I had applied to this ground canvas of greens, browns, really. And now I've applied using a brayer, a light sort of wash or coat of cadmium red and yellow ochre and just a bit of titanium white. And as you can see how this behaves with one another as opposed to it being applied directly over a white canvas. It adds a bit of depth and every one of the subsequent layers will permeate and show through. Unless of course you do a thick application, which I am doing now with that squeegee tool. I'm applying thicker impasto strokes on top of the last coat of the brayer. The possibilities of this thin paint layered approach are endless, really. In this, for example, this example now, I'm layering on the white substrate a turquoise greenish sort of color, which could hypothetically be a base coat for, a portrait or, of course, a landscape or a cityscape. And what I'll do now, just to sort of visually explain what I'm talking about, I'm adding a cadmium red deep, I believe, on top of that green, and it really shows the broken color coming through, except of course if you want to have thicker impasto strokes, which I'm applying now with a palette knife. If you do find this style of painting inspirational and you choose to maybe implement it into your own work, this essence or the economy of detail, a lot of times I find students struggle with that where they want to render everything from the beginning. What you'll find is when you focus on the essence of the subject rather than details, and I mean throughout the whole painting process, maybe just the end part we can do details, but if you focus on the essence or the energy of the subject, even though everything is impressionistic and if you want to categorize it as loose, you get this suggested detail throughout that as opposed to rendered detail. I'm not sure if that makes sense or not, but from a distance, it reads quite detailed, whereas, of course, up close, as you already saw and we'll see at the end, everything is just a kaleidoscope. It's a little maze of color notes. At this stage of the painting, I have applied most of the color notes throughout her face. I'm now starting to apply colors to her neck, and as you can see, I'm now introducing for the first time the large squeegee brush. This is the, as I said earlier, a 1-inch, half-inch combination. It's got two sides, both of them. I'm not sure if it came across through the video, but essentially has two sides to it. I'm applying paint on her neck loosely. One thing that I want to sort of get across here, we haven't talked much about it, but of course it's one of the pillars of strong painting, and that's edges. Uh, I am creating a very sharp edge on the bottom of her neck with this squeegee brush. I want that line to sort of read strongly to the viewer. If you recall from the beginning, we kept everything relatively loose in the background. I will loosen even some of the lines further, but that neckline, that plunging neckline, I want it uh, very prominent. And the value jump, the shift there will make it even more so because the neck is, well, relatively abstract. I'm not even following the warm cool rule for the neck. I'm making things as intuitive as I possibly can on the neck. I'm making that line under her chin darker for a reason. At this stage of the painting process, the latter stage, I'm of course mindful of the drawing as I was throughout the process, but also adjusting some of the color notes that may have gone awry throughout the painting process. That's not uncommon. In fact, it happens quite often. As you can see there, I'm applying cat red light yellow ochre just to give it a bit of warmth in her cheeks. I want her to read lifelike and not come across as diseased per se. I will adjust some of these notes in the shadow side as well. Uh, but overall, I'm quite happy with the mosaic of color that I was able to attain throughout her face, really. As you already know, this YouTube thing is a new thing to me. I'm enjoying it actually quite a lot as I'm painting maybe subjects that I wouldn't normally. I'm a full-time artist and I paint mostly commission work, but these little small studies are really quite interesting. Having said that, I have a tendency to sort of talk and ramble and cover all sorts of different things. If you've got any questions or some other better way possibly applying paint, comment down below, and I have a tendency to respond to everybody for the most part. At this stage of the painting where we are somewhat happy with how the face looks, um, I'm turning my attention to the background. I've already laid it out initially, however, it doesn't have enough interest for my liking, so I decided to sort of play with the edges, add some different tones, cools, warms. As I initially said, it looks like it's some sort of vineyard that she's standing in, but by the end of this, it will read more like a cityscape than anything. As I said, it doesn't really have a direct role per se, but it plays quite an important role in the overall design or the Notan structure of this painting. Which, when you think of it, I should have probably mentioned initially because the whole painting stands on the design. It's the foundation of the whole process. And if it's not strong or well thought of, basically all paintings fall apart. So what I've chosen to do for this particular portrait is focus on her face and ground her at the top as opposed to the bottom. I didn't render anything below her chin, didn't even render her clothing. I felt that the message was strong in her face, but the background, which is just behind her, of course, And I've chosen to sort of keep it minimal, just sort of appearing in that one corner, um, to create this strong contrast between the lights and darks of her face and the background. So again, the background plays this clear value design role. I'm adding some yellow ochre there for interest. I'm scratching away paint. I'm pulling and pushing. I'm applying paint. I'm trying to simplify shapes. It is a characteristic of all strong Notan structure paintings where there's a strong balance between light and dark elements in a composition. Let me know if you use similar designs, but I was quite happy with the result of this particular piece. And now at this absolute end stage, I'm adding final details. As I said earlier, I don't do details all that often with small brushes, but in this case, I'm applying just the lights of her face with a small brush. And this is also part of a strong design that I do often. I apply my signature strategically. I don't just place it randomly anywhere. I've chosen to put it on her neck. And I've also strategically chosen to use a bold red, cadmium red light into which I'm scratching my initials with a toothpick. And I've taken the camera off the tripod and I'm zooming in here for you to see all of the things we've been able to create through that whimsical paint application process. And you can see all the little notes of cools, purples, teals, and the warmths on her face that were applied spontaneously, wet on wet. The vivid color and bold contrast. You see the background is very loose, has the fan brush look there with little small notes of teal showing through and a lot of scratch marks with palette knife and brayer. In the end, I'm quite happy with the energy of this portrait, even though my wife says it doesn't really look like her. Hopefully, I'll see you next week as we explore these boundaries of representational and abstract art. Thank you very much for watching.